Welcome to Wichita's Biz That Is on KGPT. I'm Tim Witzman, president of the Wichita Independent Business Association, and we have two guests today on a topic that's very important to our community. It's the library. And with us are both Don Berry, who is the chairman of the Library Foundation Board, and also Cindy Berner Harris, who's the director of libraries. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as we've discussed, you know I have fond memories on libraries. Give me a little about the history of how the library came here.
You know, it's really interesting, Tim, because the library was one of the first things that started happening in a civic sense in Wichita's earliest days. There were lots of starts and stops, didn't always go well, but there were people who were readers from the very early days.
Kind of like right now.
Well, indeed. So by about 1911, the service actually transitioned. It became a city service. The people went right to work. They got in touch with the Carnegie Foundation, and it was through that effort that our Carnegie Library was constructed, opened in 1915. That was the home of the library until we moved to our current building in the late 60s. So
Yeah. Well,
we have over a century of service.
How many did he construct?
Hundreds
all
of
across
libraries.
the country. And that's now part of Fidelity Bank, and they restored it beautifully.
Beautifully.
They did. And you know, one of the interesting things is they actually came and they used the photo archive of our library to
Cool.
find those original pictures, and they restored back in many ways to that
Before
original.
libraries, I know I'm from the old Midwest, you know, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio. And in those post-revolutionary days, before they had libraries, they would buy truckloads of books. Somebody would go east and just bring back a whole wagon full of books. Very interesting.
Right, right.
So what kinds of evolution have we seen on the library? I mean, we started with one, and then of course we went to the branches and all, but how did the library evolve?
Well, I think that from that real anchor of that Carnegie building, the service has grown in the number of locations. We've done several different things with branches. We actually had a branch in a Piggly Wiggly in as early as the 1920s. So we were really reaching out. We had an area of bookmobiles where we did a lot of that. In the 70s, we came back and we created several branch libraries in the multi-purpose recreation centers around the community. We've now kind of phased back to standalone anchor institutions. So we have a central library, we have 4 large branches in each quadrant of the city, and then we have some smaller neighborhood outlets as well. One of the biggest changes is how people use the library. You know, from the original days where we had just the books or the books in the magazines, we now, when we buy a book, may buy it in as many as 12 different formats.
12?
By the time we look at the different formats, the different languages, the different things, and that has to do with books on CD, obviously now the inclusion of ebooks, which we make available in our collection, books in large print, books in languages, primarily Spanish as well as English here in Wichita. So we have a lot to offer.
When did all that really begin to happen? When did things start to change? Was it 60s?
Well, you know, there's always been an evolution that goes really back to the 1930s when people were able to start buying paperbacks, and then they said you wouldn't need the library. And that proved not to be the case. So every generation or so, there's a new thing. But I would say really in the 70s, as we started getting books on tape, we saw the real explosion of the different formats as well as the printed word that became part of our collections.
Well, I'd mentioned to you that I'm from small town Indiana, and that's what you did in the summer. Play some baseball and go to the library.
That's right.
Always had library books. Thank God for Horatio Hornblower, all those wonderful things. Okay, we've got these changes going on. What challenges does that represent? I mean, if you have to have that many media, this creates greater expense per book, in a sense?
Well, per title, it certainly does, because we used to buy a particular work, you know, in just enough copies to meet the reading demand. Now our staff really has to look into their crystal ball, if you would, to figure out not only how many we need, but how we divide that allocation out. How many people are likely to want that on ebooks? How many want to come in and borrow the printed books? How many may be the people that want to listen to that when they're driving in the car or when they're at the gym and they're exercising? So there's a lot to figure out. It also really impacts what the facility does for us, and it creates demands on how flexible our spaces can be, because we already know that we're always shifting kind of the ratios of these things, and we know that will probably only happen with more frequency going into the future.
Have the demographics changed? Age groups, types of people coming in?
Well, certainly, you know, Wichita is a very diverse community. And
oh, it is. People don't realize. East High School, do you know how many languages are spoken there?
I'm sure.
63.
Really?
Right.
Yeah. When I talk to people on the coast and they kind of treat you like you're this vanilla white bread place, and no. You do not understand.
Right.
We are not. And I think the other thing that we see at the library is, you know, we are a place where people are coming in to town too, and that impacts, if they've used libraries in other places, they bring those expectations for what they had, and that challenges us to be better too.
Of the things that are happening now, which the faster growing that you have to deal with? Technology kinds of things.
Well, in terms of the collection, it's definitely the e-books, the digital resources. The reference books that used to come in paper now are all online. So figuring out how to use those and how to make those accessible to people who don't have the technology equipment or the skill is a real challenge.
And the problem with online, there's 25% of our local population that doesn't have access to the internet.
Of course. Exactly.
So that's a big role that libraries play, is making sure that everybody has that equitable access to that growing source of online information.
I'll even do a confession. When I was in Chicago, I was a budget director, and they didn't have a capital budgeting system at all, and we're making a mess of things. So I decided, I'm going to create one. I went to the library, took out a couple of books, sat at my kitchen table till 2 in the morning, and wrote a capital budget system, you know.
Yeah.
And thank heaven for the library.
Right, great example of one of the ways that we can be helpful.
Okay, we're going to take a little break, and we'll be right back with more about the library on Wichita's Biz That Is.